Welcome to another episode of the Coffee Break Podcast, where our mission is to share business ideas, practices, and strategies while we enjoy our cup of coffee. And today it's going to be a little bit different. Obviously, we don't have a guest with us, but we're going to be talking about book suggestions. This is something that's been very impactful for this organization. And so we want to share some of the books that we're actually utilizing, reading, and applying on a regular basis here. So we're going to break that down into 5 book suggestions right after this.
We got so much to say. We got a podcast to make. We're sipping on lattes, and it's time for a coffee break. It's time for a coffee break. Oh, yeah.
Hey, welcome back. And again, thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule to join us today. Hopefully this episode will be very beneficial for you. So why in the world are we breaking from our normal kind of back and forth conversation with a guest to have 5 book suggestions? Well, one of the reasons why is very often we get direct messages or text messages or contacts, emails, looking for book suggestions, maybe some ideas of how we can share some of the information that we're applying here with other businesses. And I have personally found it very beneficial to have conversations with other business owners and leaders and them share book suggestions with me. So I kind of took together a little bit of a list here of the top 5. And we could do this episode 3 or 4 more times and have complete different list of books to go off of. But today we're just going to go through 5 that I think kind of group together very nicely within an organization and how you can read through them and apply them. So we'll kind of start from the very beginning. These are not ranked in order of importance. It's just, I think, in order of the way that I read them and the way that I have applied them and that the organization has applied them. So we'll get started here. I wanted to talk first about why book suggestions. So for a long period of time, I've been listening to podcasts and not really a big reader. So I was grasping small pieces of information. I found a lot of value out of having conversations with people and learning from them. And I was not big on sitting down with a book. It was actually very difficult, and it still is very difficult for me to sit down with a physical book and read it. But through a lot of research that I was doing, I was realizing that I was missing out on a lot of very impactful, very important pieces of information that pertain to business. And it was just a part of education, learning and growing and expanding your mind, and also reading different perspectives or opening yourself up to different perspectives. So I made a commitment about a year and a half ago that I wanted to be more intentional with with reading and with expanding that information, that knowledge base that I was only relying on for having conversations with people or listening to snippets of this information in podcasts. So that's where a lot of this came from. Now, I've read different books over the years. A key fundamental, and this is not on the list, but a fundamental book that I read many years ago, and my business partner Chris also read the same book, is EntreLeadership by Dave Ramsey. And that is not on this list, but I think it's one of the fundamental books that any business owner should read because it gives you a lot of practical information and just kind of a really good playbook for all things business, and it gives you a high-level understanding of that. So that is definitely a recommendation, but it's not on this list. But it did trigger a couple of other things down the line to be able to follow up and say, hey, this is very practical. And being able to apply some of the practices in EntreLeadership opened up the ability to think through and start looking at other books that would be beneficial as well. So that is the reason why. Now, a big question that I get from a lot of people is, how do you have time to read? That was a question that I asked myself a lot for many years. I don't have time to read. I don't have time to sit down and do this because it was just a very daunting task. Well, now with technology, obviously it's easier than ever. There's Audible, which is a subscription service where you can download, you get a credit or you can get 2 credits on a monthly basis to be able to download a book. You can sync it with an iPad, your computer, with your phone, with your watch. If you have a smartwatch, there's a lot of ways that you can do that, and it downloads it to your device. So if you're on an airplane a lot, if you travel a lot, if you're commuting in a car, you can listen to that and get the audio version of it. Now, I've heard and read and seen people say and be very down on audiobooks. Hey, audiobook is not a real book. If you really want to get the experience, you have to have that physical book and read it. And that's an argument that we can have forever, but I can tell you from my perspective that I get a lot of value out of listening to it. Now, it is key when you select the audiobook that you are enjoying the person that's reading the audio version of it, because that can be daunting at times, but it can be a very impactful way to get information and go back and review it. Now, one of the things that you will note is that I also have a lot of physical copies. That was an idea that I received from someone else. Dale Bowman, actually, from Medico and Asa Abloy, gave me that tip a while back and said that he listens to the audio version and also has the physical book that he goes through at the same time, because one of the things to note is oftentimes on audiobooks, you lose out on some of the visual aid. Sometimes they'll have charts or graphs or takeaways or exercises that you want to do, and they are not typically included in the audiobook, or you have to go find a PDF. So that information is going to be in the physical copy of the book as well, which is a huge way to do that. So if you use Apple device, obviously there's the Apple iTunes store. You can download audiobooks. Audible is my preference from a subscription standpoint. It keeps it fresh and reminds me to download a new book. And there's lots of ways that it kind of keeps you motivated to do that. Finding time for it is a big question. How do you find the time to do that? And some of the things that I've done, this is just my personal experience to kind of share with you, is, again, using it during commuting. Anytime I'm on an airplane, I'm listening to an audiobook or a podcast. That is just something that I dedicated my time to so that I could get the most out of that downtime. But I also utilize it when I'm exercising. If I'm running, if I'm walking, if I'm in any type of motion where I'm not physically sitting down, I typically am listening to an audiobook or a podcast, and that has been a huge benefit for me. Physically, I've been able to get some physical activity and exercise, but also mentally, I'm stretching my brain at the same time, and it makes the running less annoying because I'm actually learning while I'm doing it, and it kind of creates that effect. Me personally have replaced a lot of my television consumption with audiobooks. And so anytime that I would have typically spent watching a television show, I've replaced that with some form of exercise and listening to audiobooks. So that's just some tips that I have picked up, some tips that I've heard from other people, and ways that I've been able to create some time for that within my own life so that I can continue to grow my mind and continue to develop some of the perspectives and some of the ideas that we want to try to work through. So that is kind of the setup and the reason why we're doing this. Again, I want to be able to share this information with you, and in the same way that people have shared information with me, I want to pass it along to you as well. And every single book that we're going to be talking about today has been a recommendation from someone else that has come through my circle of influence at some point and time. So the first book that I wanted to share is called Turn the Ship Around. It's by an author, David Marquet. And this book, just from a summary perspective, is all about a naval submarine. So David Marquet is a former captain of the submarine in the Navy, and he goes through and breaks down the way that the Navy views leadership and the way that he was taught to view leadership and how it changed and how he changed the way that he operated a submarine. Now, this particular book was a gift, and it actually, the copy that I have here was actually a gift from a Vistage Leadership Summit that I attended several years ago. And when it was given to me, it just kind of sat on my shelf for a long period of time, and I never opened it, never looked at it, never took the time to read it. And it took a lot of prompting for me to open this book up and read it. And when I did, myself and my business partner, Chris, both read this at the same time, and we had some really interesting takeaways from it, and it has impacted, and I can tell you that this, in conjunction with Dave Ramsey's EntreLeadership, changed the entire trajectory of our organization, and it allowed us to grow our team from less than 10 to now over 37 individuals in our organization being able to implement some of the things from this book and from Entre Leadership. So a quick summary of it is that it's all about changing your organization from a leader-follower to a leader-leader mentality. And what does that mean? Well, it means that you are empowering people to make decisions based off of the parameters that are set within the organization. They have the ability to make those decisions, and they're not constantly in the air quotes that I'll use, feeding information up the chain and down the chain. So a lot of times when you get into organizational structure, people say, that information falls from the top, or you've got to run it up the ladder so that you can get approval for it. And this book really breaks that down and kind of shows some of the things that are being done that way, especially in the Navy concept here, was a waste of time, and it was detrimental to the people that were trying to get decisions made. One of the examples that they give is there is an operator sitting at a button on a controller, and they have to request permission to push that button from their direct supervisor, which their direct supervisor has to request permission from his direct supervisor. And on up the line, 6 people in, then that captain on duty says, yes, you can push the button. And then all that information has to come back down the line so that the person can push that button. And as ridiculous as that sounds, that's the process that was happening. And one of the things he outlined was when people needed to put in a request for leave, for time off, it literally had to have 6 signatures on that piece of paper just to get authorization for someone to take time off. And so he kind of took that and flipped it around and said, okay, here are the parameters that we can work inside of, and now you can make those decisions on your own. So it's all about empowering your team to make decisions. So one of the things that I noted on here is one of the ways we implemented it was a mind shift change. It really initiated, wow, this is how we're operating right now. People are forced to ask questions and get approval so many times that it is just detrimental to forward progress within our organization. And so that was very powerful to understand that. And another note that I put on here is when's a good time to read this? Well, if you're in business and you're the person that's sitting there constantly being asked questions, and maybe it's the same questions over and over again, and you're constantly setting people up for waiting for approval from you, that's a good time to read this book, because it really helps you understand why that slows down the progress and why that is it causes issues within the team where they don't feel like they have power to make decisions and actually enact change within the organization. So a big takeaway from this book is the phrase, I intend to, rather than can I have permission to. So instead of asking, do I have permission to do this? I intend to do this. Do you see any issues with it? And it's an entire different change. Another big takeaway from this book was the way that I handled questions. I used to answer the questions and give a lot of the detail of how to do it and all the explanation. This book taught me to pause when a question is asked and ask the question back to the individual, what do you think we should do? And it completely changed the way people approached and asked for questions, because I was getting their opinion first, and then we would go down that path. So turn the ship around, majorly impactful for our organization and the way that it's changed things. And it's definitely a huge recommendation to read. I would say that this one is probably more powerful to read in the book than it is audio. You may not enjoy the audio version of it. There are some sections in here that may get a little dry, but the actual content of this book is very, very powerful. So be sure to check that out. The next book that I wanted to talk about is called Powerful. It is the story from Patty McCord, and she was actually involved in a lot of different tech companies in Silicon Valley, and most notably with Netflix. She was is really known for implementing an unlimited paid time off for employees of Netflix. So she instituted this thing in the organization where people could just take off as much time as they want. And your immediate thought to that as a business leader or an owner is, how is that possible? That can't be done. And that is the exact way that I felt whenever I heard this on a podcast. So I was listening to a podcast where she was talking a little bit about this, and it kind of made my skin curl. How is that possible? That's not doable within our organization. But once you get into the book and you start listening to it, start reading it, you understand the framework behind it. it's less about the unlimited time off. You can take as much time off as you want as long as your work is being accomplished. And so it's kind of following the same pattern as Turn the Ship Around, is it's involving empowerment of your team. You are in charge of your schedule. You know the deadlines that need to be made. You know what's expected. If you meet those, then you can manage your own time. But if you need me to manage your time for you, then I'm also delegating, I'm micromanaging. It turns into that whole process. So there was some major takeaways from this. And some of the things that I heard on the podcast that were a little different, or that I grew from once I actually went into the book part of it, was the fact that she really talks about hiring great people and then giving opportunities and trusting your gut instincts. So Patty McCord was a HR professional in Silicon Valley. And to understand that is, you would think that this book is a framework of this is how you interview, this is how you hire, this is how you deal with people. And it's more about understanding what you're looking for within your team and looking for the right people to be on your team. And one of the very, very interesting points that I took away, probably one of the number one takeaways that I got from this particular book, was she defines an organization where a lot of times they're misconceived as a family. So one of the concepts with family is your family is your family. You can't, I guess you can technically take yourself away from the family, but once you're connected with your family, that you're always connected with them. And she talks about the difference between family and team. And a team is a collective group of people that are on the same mission, on the same goal, that are working together for a common purpose. And it's okay when you have a team if oftentimes people come off the team and new people come on the team. So she'll use a lot of sports analogies in there, that any type of a championship team, basketball, baseball, football, any of those teams will have new talent come on and have older talent leave. Once they have been able to put in their effort, they've put in everything that they can, and then they either move on to a different position, or they don't always stay in that same position over and over again. So understanding that it's okay for transition to happen and how to work with that was a major takeaway for me, and understanding the difference between family and a team. The big thing of this, the way we implemented it, is setting up frameworks for expectations and understanding how to manage your own time and meet your own obligations that impact the organization. So those are some big takeaways from the book Powerful by Patty McCord. Good time to read this is when you're dealing with a lot of hiring. Maybe you're struggling with the firing process. Maybe you're struggling with letting people go, or identifying when people don't need to be on that team anymore, or maybe in that role. It's a big time to read that. And the other part of it is finding some healthy habits within your organization for transition of team members, because that's something that a lot of businesses like we have struggled with in the past. So that is a good recommendation for you. And I got that from a podcast that I was listening to. The next book that I wanted to talk about is Radical Candor. This is by an author, Kim Scott. Again, very similar to Patty McCord in a sense that she is involved in a lot of technology companies in Silicon Valley. I got this recommendation from Steve Van Til from Brevo. I was having a conversation with him about a year ago, and I said, "Hey, Steve, what kind of books do you read? What's going on?" He's the CEO of Brevo Systems, which is a technology company, and he said, "We're actually going through a book right now called Radical Candor." And so I added it to my list of suggestions, and it took me about 6 or 8 months to get to it. And when I did, I was blown away by the impact that it had on a lot of different aspects. But essentially, the summary of Radical Candor is figuring out how you can have open and honest conversations within your organization. The key factor in that is building relationships. Radical Candor's core concept is, how do you build relationships so that when you do need to have those open, honest, and direct conversations, you can do so in an effective manner. And it is a major change because going back to the Patty McCord philosophy, family versus team, and you have to build that relationship either way. If it's family or team, you have to build relationships, and that's where that trust comes into play. and you'll get a lot of benefit out of it. One of the big things that this helped in our organization is it created some framework, and it created an awareness to the importance of one-on-one meetings with folks that are working closely with each other. If you want to call it a direct supervisor, a direct report, but those people that you're directly responsible for and supporting, creating an environment where you have regular one-on-one meetings. And these aren't long hour, 2, 3, 4 hour meetings. These are 30-minute check-ins that you understand, hey, what's going on in your world? What's something that you need from me to help your job go better? And what's the big thing that you're working on right now? And one of the frameworks that Kim talks about a lot in this book is during that one-on-one meeting, it is more of the role of the person that you're having the one-on-one with, their responsibility to bring an agenda to the table. Your role as a leader in the organization in that meeting is to just be available, just to be there to listen and to coach and to help that individual grow and develop. It is not a meeting where you're sitting down and giving them correction constantly. It's not being called into the principal's office, so to speak. It is you have taken time out of your day, out of your schedule, out of your week to make yourself available for those specific team members. I can tell you that we implemented that in our organization probably within the last 6 months. And every day I have 2 one-on-one meetings with 2 different team members, and it carries on throughout the week. And it has been a major impact for me from an awareness of things that needed to be worked on within our organization. And it also has been a big takeaway for the team members that I'm meeting with, so that I understand what they're working on, and the struggles or the hiccups that they're having within their day-to-day task. It's a quick 30-minute check-in on a weekly basis, and I just carve out time out of my schedule to make sure that I'm available for them. And it's been a major impact. So that was a big takeaway from that, and it's how we've implemented it. A good time to read this is whenever you're in a situation where you feel like your team is growing and you have no idea what's going on, and you don't feel like you're adequately supporting them, is a good time to kind of read this. Or you feel like you are just going bonkers and nobody's having these open and honest conversations. So it's definitely a good read, and it is actually very fun to listen to. The audio version of this book is a really cool listen to. The next book on our list is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. This is from Patrick Lencioni, and I got this recommendation from a podcast, actually Entree Leadership, which is one of my favorite podcasts that I listen to every week. And he is a regular guest on there because he writes some great business books. But this particular book has been around for a while, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And this is one that I definitely would recommend listening to, but also getting the physical copy of it, because there is a lot of reference material in here. There's a lot of visuals that you would want to do. You can find a lot of this stuff on Google as well, but in the physical book itself, there are some, if you can see that on there, there's some different diagrams that will help you understand this. So, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It sounds a little harsh, but it's very impactful if you understand that as a leadership team, you're not getting along. And this can be at any level. Maybe this is 2 people, 3 people, 10 people, whatever it is, that team is working together and you sense a little bit of dysfunction. And some of the characteristics of that are absence of trust, fear of conflict, and lack of accountability. Those are 3 of the 5 dysfunctions. So if you're going through your business and you go, you know what, I feel like we don't have a lot of trust in this organization, or at least within the leadership, then that's a good time to do this. If there's a fear of conflict, when you're sitting at a meeting and things are not being said that need to be said so that they can be aired out, so that they can be talked through and solutions can be accomplished, then that will be an inhibitor to your growth because you're not having those open, honest conversations. So this is a really good book to read when it comes to that. So some of the takeaways from this particular book lit a fire in me to implement some better structured leadership meetings with our organization to get everybody in unity, and to actually implement some of the components of this book, which we'll talk about next, which is traction. So some of the takeaways from this is we're actually getting prepared right now in the next week or so. We'll be having our first annual leadership summit for Loc-Doc, which is going to be a core group of individuals that'll come together. We meet regularly on a weekly basis to get some quick updates and metrics for the organization, but we really want to do a deep dive in and make sure that we have our priorities aligned as an organization within each department for the coming year of 2020. And so we're going to be doing that within the next couple of weeks and setting that up and then having structured quarterly updates after that. And some of the framework for that is in traction. The actual implementation of that really was inspired through this particular book. A pro tip on this, I would tell you, is to get your leadership team to read this as well so that they have awareness of it, because this is one of these books. If you read it, the concept inside of it, I've been aware of for a while, but I've never been able to communicate it as well as when you actually read the book. So that is one that you definitely want your team to read, anybody on your leadership team to read that and understand that, because it will make them aware and open their eyes up to any of those dysfunctions that may make themselves open and aware. The last book on our recommendation of these 5 book recommendations for this episode is the book called Traction. I got this recommendation from a masterminds group that I'm in, and they mentioned it a couple of times, and I just kept ignoring it. And I finally got this book at the probably beginning of 2019 and really dove into it. And I was blown away by the information inside here. I would tell you that next to the EntreLeadership book, this is one that you should definitely get into your arsenal because it has tons of valuable information, exercises. This particular page here, this is called the Vision and Traction Organizer, and it helps you to understand what you need to be focused on and how you implement it. So a couple of things on here, it talks about core values. If you don't understand the core values of your business, if they're not established, if they're not documented, if they're not communicated regularly, that is step number 1. If you talk to anybody about the book Traction and implementing it, that is step number 1. Do you have core values established, and are they communicated well within your organization? And it'll challenge you on that multiple times over, is understanding that and understanding how to implement it. They have a process inside of the book Traction called EOS, and you'll hear a lot of people refer to that. It's called the Entrepreneur Operating System, and it is something that you can implement. It's 6 key areas of your organization that you can focus on to find results and actually put those things in practice to get results for your organization. It talks a lot about metrics and KPIs, which are key performance indicators. How do you know if what you're doing is working? If you don't have a clear way to measure that, if you don't have a regular time to review that, if you don't know what is good, you're not going to create traction in your organization because you don't understand what's happening. But it talks about several different factors within your organization that you need to be aware of. The 6 key factors are people, vision, data, processes, traction, and issues. And those are all key things that you're going to go on. One of the big takeaways that I got from this is an issues list, issues resolution, finding a way that you can keep track of issues that you're having in your business that need to be addressed, but understanding that you can't fix everything all at the same time. And so oftentimes you have to slow down the pace at which you're implementing changes or fixing these issues based off of their priority. So if you have 50 different issues within your organization, you can only prioritize a few of those, maybe 3 of those at a time that you can actually be actively working on. If you're constantly trying to work on all 50 of them, you're not actually making progress, and you're actually causing more confusion than you're making progress on. So that is a big challenge point in the book, but it's definitely impactful as well. So you definitely want to read this at any point in business, because it's going to give, if it's early on in business and it's 2 people, this is a good book to have as a foundation and a fundamental component. If you're 30 years into business and you have 30 team members, this is a good book to read because it will help you kind of flip things around and set the pace and the foundation for going forward. So that is a great recommendation there. And I got that from a masterminds group. So That's kind of my 5 book recommendations that I would share with you. Again, just to kind of recap that. And if you want to get a full list of all this, we'll have it all on our website at Loc-Doc.net/blog. And you'll be able to read a full list of all of these. And it should also be in the show notes as well. So just to kind of a recap, Turn the Ship Around from David Marquet, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni, Powerful by Patty McCord, Radical Candor by Kim Scott, and Traction by Gino Wickman. I have listened to all 5 of those on audiobooks, and I've also read a few of them in the physical book as well, and they've been very impactful and informative for our organization. So I would definitely recommend taking the time to do that. If reading or listening to books is not part of your current regiment or your current process, I would challenge you to do that. I think that's something, even if you said, I'm only going to be able to do 1 book a year, start somewhere. If you're not doing that now, start somewhere. If you can get up to a book a month, that's going to be awesome. They claim that some of the top CEOs in America read regularly. They claim Elon Musk reads 2 books a week, I believe is what I heard. And that folks like some other major leaders in business are reading 500 pages a day. So find ways that you can implement this in, because you're just going to grow your knowledge and your education of business practices and be able to find things that you can institute into your business and into your team building. So I think that those are very impactful for you. I would love to hear your book recommendations. Maybe you've read some of these books. I'd love to get your feedback on them. Maybe you have some differences in opinion than what I took away. Love to hear your feedback and opinion on that. And if you have any other recommendations from anything other than these books, feel free to drop that in the comment or send us a message online as well. We'd love to hear from you on any of our social media platforms, in the comments below, wherever you're watching this video or you're listening to the audio version of it. We'd love to hear your feedback and any book suggestions you have so that we can add that to our future list as well. Other than that, thank you very much for your continued time that you dedicate to listening to this podcast. We've got some really great guests lined up and coming in the future that we're going to be sharing with you, and some concepts that we're going to be going over, things that we've been trying and implementing, and some reviews on maybe some of the things that we've been using from these books within our business with some of our own team as well. That's all coming up in the future. So until next time, make sure you subscribe if you haven't already on all of the podcast platforms or whichever podcast platform you're listening on. If you're watching this on video form, share it if it's something that would be beneficial. These books can help a lot of different people, so feel free to share that. And then check out our blog post, Loc-Doc.net/blog, for all of the list and information and links to where you can find them. And obviously, if you haven't already, check out Loc-Doc.net/podcast, where you can subscribe on all the platforms. We will see you next time on the Coffee Break Podcast. To learn more about the topics discussed today and to connect with us online to hear all of the episodes available, visit Loc-Doc.net/podcast.
We got so much to say. We got a podcast to make. We're sipping on lattes, and it's time for a coffee break. It's time for a coffee break. Oh, yeah.
The Coffee Break Podcast is brought to you by Loc-Doc Security. We'd love to connect with you online on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Just search LOCDOCINC.